One UI 6.1 has changed a lot about the S23 Ultra. But what about the camera? Daniel here from SamMobile TV, and it's time to revisit the S23 Ultra versus S24 Ultra comparison now that the phone has got One UI 6.1. A lot of you asked in the comments to redo this camera comparison once the S23 Ultra got updated to One UI 6.1. So here we are. The previous findings were that the S23 Ultra favored sort of lighter processing versus the S24 Ultra's bit more pared back brightness in favor of a bit more contrast in the shadows. So I went out to try and recreate the shots that I had taken previously to see if I could see if there's any difference if the S23 Ultra has now changed with One UI 6.1. I looked through a heap of samples and there were subtle differences here and there, some producing more detail, others not. For a while I struggled to find anything substantial in the difference between the two photos. And that's when it kind of hit me. The fact there isn't differences between the two means that the S23 Ultra has changed. The only real difference I noticed between the two is that the S23 Ultra and the S24 Ultra, the sky tones and colors were different. The S23 Ultra definitely had a bit more of a natural tone with the color of the sky versus what the S23 Ultra was producing. I also did notice this in the preview screen on the S23 Ultra and the S24 Ultra, that the S23 Ultra's preview screen was a little bit bright and the blue was very, very vibrant, whereas the S24 Ultra was a little bit more pared back. What was evident though, across the photos that I took, was that the S23 Ultra seems to have brought in some darker shadows and darker contrast in areas like the clouds and the darker shadow areas. Initially, I was a bit taken aback because in previous updates or previous software versions of the S23 Ultra, it favored that lighter processing very, very heavily, whereas now it seems to have gone the other way and brought a little bit more darker contrast in. But as you're seeing now, the S23 Ultra has got consistently darker areas in the clouds and darker shadow areas, and that just was not evident before. You can go back and watch the previous camera comparison and you'll see that, whereas that is not evident in these comparison photos that I've taken. This kind of parallels and matches what the S24 Ultra has done with that darker contrast in the shadows and the clouds. There were definitely some outliers across the bunch with the photos that I took, but on the whole, in the overall scheme, the S23 Ultra has kind of changed the processing a little bit to be a little bit more darker in those shadow areas. And this seems to be a change that Samsung has made for One UI 6.1 specifically. I retested some other things, the zoom namely. What it seems there is that Samsung with the 10 times on the S23 Ultra is still better than the S24 Ultra at that 10 times and 10 times. When you compare it to what the S24 Ultra was producing at 10 times with this One UI 6.1 update applied, it seems as if the S23 Ultra has further optimized that 10x zoom and you're getting more detail out of it. And even up to the 30x level, the S23 Ultra is better and doing better than what the S24 Ultra can do. So hats off to Samsung for optimizing that further with One UI 6.1. But, and there's always a but, the S24 Ultra between 3x and 10x is still the best. I took some shots from 3x and all the way up to 9.9x. I really was keen on showing this difference. And you can see any shot sort of in between. The S24 Ultra is just taking better photos. It's capturing more detail, the processing and the contrast is better. It's because it's got that 50 megapixel 5x camera that it's capable of taking these better detailed shots in that range. The S23 Ultra, to be fair to it, does okay, but with a 3x camera at 10 megapixel, it doesn't really stand a chance at competing with the S24 Ultra. That is pretty much where the difference will lie. The S24 Ultra has that sort of 0.6 to 10x advantage with that zoom. Longer range zoom, the S23 Ultra still absolutely crushes it. And if that is more important to you, that is probably where you should stick. But in that early zoom range, the S24 Ultra, even after the One UI 6.1 update, is still better than the S23 Ultra by a distance. Moving into video, basically the same processing applies in terms of what Samsung have updated. The S23 Ultra brings a bit more life back into the video. That same sort of contrast in the clouds and the shadows has come back. As well as though the same difference in the sky, the S24 Ultra still has that more natural look about it compared to what the S23 Ultra brings out. I like that better. It's more aesthetically pleasing to me because it more replicates what I was looking at. And also the dynamic range seems to be a little bit more to my preference also. The S23 Ultra has definitely improved and things aren't as light as what they used to be, which I'm very, very pleased with. I didn't dislike the processing from last year. I actually liked that Samsung brought out things a little bit more and made the shadow areas a bit lighter. It was definitely something that I appreciated at the time. But having seen now what they've done with the S24 Ultra and balancing things a little bit better and still maintaining that lightness in some areas, I think it's the right move to bring the S23 Ultra's processing sort of up to that level, both in photos and videos. But even with all these processing advantages, the extra camera modes and video functions that the S24 Ultra has over the S23 Ultra, I would still pick the S24 Ultra just for all that flexibility that these extra camera modes bring you. Because even with One UI 6.1 being brought to the Galaxy S23 Ultra, Samsung have only brought one of the camera updates back to it that what the S24 Ultra got. That is single take. The ability to use any of the rear cameras using single take's camera mode. But everything else, the portrait video zoom, the dual recording, none of that has made its way back to the S23 Ultra. Some might say it's a processing thing, but when you see how Galaxy AI is basically the same, I don't really think you can say that, because the processing power of the H Gen 2 for Galaxy should be capable enough to do what Samsung have brought to the S24 Ultra. So look, it was basically just a quick video to retest some of the things that we'd already tested before, now that the S23 Ultra has got the One UI 6.1 update. The S24 Ultra also got updated to April, so that means that they're both running the latest versions of their firmware possible. You let me know in the comments which one you think did the best, which one you preferred, and whether you noticed the difference in the S23 Ultra compared to the last video that we did. If you like this sort of stuff, make sure you hit the subscribe button and like this video as well. Come and follow us on all the socials that we've got. We're pretty much everywhere you can think of. And also go check out our website, SamMobile.com. There is a plethora of information about Samsung housed on that thing, so go check it out for all the latest updates on Samsung. We'll see you next time. Thanks.